With Ja'Juan Seider headed to Notre Dame, we could see some Penn State running backs or running back commits follow him.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football. Thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show. Ja'Juan Seider goes to Notre Dame. Should we expect any players to follow him? Any commits to follow as well? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Let's talk about Nicholas Singleton and Ja'Juan Allen, and then get to some other players on the depth chart, as well as those verbal commits in the class of 26 and 27. So for Penn State, losing Ja'Juan Seider, that's a big deal. Recruiting, but the relationships that he's built along the way. And part of the reason Singleton and Allen came back was because they had a strong relationship with Seider. They expected him to be in the fold, and then Notre Dame makes a phone call because they lose their running backs coach. And now everything's obviously completely different here in the middle of February. But if you had to ask me, I think Singleton and Allen, because it makes the most sense for them to stay at Penn State. Above all else, they're committed to James Franklin. And I know they work with their specific position coach, but James Franklin's still the consistent there. And for them to go into their fourth and final season of college football, to transfer away from the program, the offense, the system that they know best, and this is across the board, but whether it's Notre Dame or maybe another school, because there's always been the rumors that were circulating that other schools are trying to push Singleton and Allen, yes, into the transfer portal, and they have stayed time and time again. This is their final season. And when you look at it that way, that they would have to learn a new system, they'd have to learn a new offense, they'd have to go into a completely different setup. I don't know that that's ideal when, you did pass up on the opportunity to be drafted, but you got to consider all things, and they know Andy Kotelnicki's system the best. They have chemistry built with Drew Aller, this offensive line, this 1-2 punch, and I can't imagine that both of them would go to Notre Dame. So that's just not an ideal situation for them. The best setup is for them to stay at Penn State. And then when you look at it from Notre Dame's perspective, their depth chart is pretty loaded. They are returning just about every contributor from last year's team, particularly Jeremiah Love. So there's not really a need at running back for Notre Dame in the present. Now, eventually Jeremiah Love will move on, but they'll all be in the same running back class for the 2026 NFL draft. And a three, as much as Notre Dame would like it, it doesn't make sense for either side, for Singleton and Allen to follow Seider and for Notre Dame to want any extra running backs, because they're pretty set as far as Jeremiah Love as their starter, Jadarian Price as a backup, Aeneas Williams as well. Notre Dame is set in the present, but what about the future? What about the future? Notre Dame is going to lose Jeremiah Love, and I don't exactly know the timelines of a Jadarian Price or an Aeneas Williams, but I can't say the same could be said for Quentin Martin, Corey Smith, Jabri Wallace-Coleman, Tyke Hayes, those running backs that are further down the depth chart. Cam Wallace is eventually going to get healthy. Penn State is maxed out at running back. So speaking from Notre Dame's point of view, if a lot of those running backs are out of eligibility, or we know that Jeremiah Love is going to play one more season before he's going to go into the NFL draft, the future looks completely different. So maybe this doesn't necessarily happen in a spring transfer portal window, but it could happen one way or another. Corey Smith coming over from the state of Wisconsin, Cam Wallace all the way from Georgia. As great of an institution as Penn State is, and a football program, Ja'Juan Seider certainly built strong connections and strong relationships to get Corey Smith to make that jump out of the state of Wisconsin, Cam Wallace out of the state of Georgia, Quentin Martin from the western side of Pennsylvania, from the Pittsburgh area. So it's not too far from him, but in the scheme of the future, you can also look at it this way. Penn State is going to be losing Nicholas Singleton and Ja'Juan Allen. So I'm saying it's a possibility, but it's not a guarantee. What is a guarantee? I can all but guarantee it. Nicholas Singleton, Ja'Juan Allen are staying put. In terms of Quentin Martin, Cam Wallace, Corey Smith, is the allure there? Ja'Juan Seider certainly played a role in getting you to Penn State. But I think there's an opportunity at the end of the day when Singleton and Allen both move on, both co-starting running backs. 2026 is completely wide open for any of them. However, Notre Dame can say the exact same thing, and that was the position coach that recruited you. Now let's talk about actual recruits. Messiah Mickens, Keemon Spell, and I know we're really looking out to the future, but Messiah Mickens has been, look, I try not to read into social media posts too often from high school players. It's just not the right thing to do to try to interpret them. But Messiah Mickens has made it pretty clear that he likes Ja'Juan Seider a lot, that that's his guy, that he wants God to guide him. At least that's what he's posted to his social media. So when he's saying things directly like this, he's obviously affected by Ja'Juan Seider leaving Penn State to go to Notre Dame. Is that a possibility? That's, I would say, of the possibilities that a move happens where Penn State loses out on a player, Messiah Mickens is the player to watch. What Penn State does have going for them is the fact that Messiah Mickens is from the state of Pennsylvania. Keemon Spell, same thing, in-state running back. Those are top running back recruits respectively for 26 and 27. But James Franklin is the consistent. That's something he talks about in his recruiting pitches, is that position coaches are going to change. Commit to me because I'm here long term. So some people might not like that, but for the most part, that is what the foundation is built on. James Franklin's stability at Penn State, that he's not going anywhere, that he's not looking for other jobs. So in this case, I would look at Messiah Mickens. Keon Spell is in the class of 2027. That is so far out to project, but they committed to Penn State for a reason. They're only verbally committed, so they could easily, and note, here's the thing about Ja'Juan Seider going to Notre Dame. Just because those two recruits are verbally committed to Penn State does not mean that Ja'Juan Seider isn't going to make an attempt to flip them, because he's already built the relationship. That would be a disservice to Notre Dame. That would be a disservice to himself as a coach, and you have to do your job. All is fair here. I do not blame Seider if he reaches out to Messiah, if he reaches out to Keemon and says, why don't you follow me over to Notre Dame? But we'll see. I think where Penn State does have at least a puncher's chance in retaining their commitment is that they're both in-state commitments. They're both from the state of Pennsylvania. So we'll see how it all plays out. But this does have a big impact. Do not dismiss Ja'Juan Seider leaving Penn State for Notre Dame as something that Penn State will just overcome easily. No, I do believe that Penn State can minimize this loss, but it's certainly going to be an uphill battle for the Nittany Lions. We're going to talk to Tyler over at Locked On Irish coming up after the break. And today's episode is brought to you by WayFair. After the holiday hustle, and I know it feels like it's so far away, but there's nothing like giving your home a little TLC. You can find that decluttering, refreshing your space will help you get back into the swing of things. Whether you're just tidying up, cleaning out, or you want to give your space a new look to start the new year, WayFair has everything you need, and it's all within your budget. You can look at furniture, and there's a huge selection at WayFair that makes it easy to find the pieces that will fit your style and your budget. The best part, the hassle-free delivery, even for those larger items. Wayfair's site, super easy to navigate, and you'll find everything you need in no time. There's something for every style, every home, no matter the space, no matter the budget. Wayfair makes it easy to tackle those home goals because of the endless inspiration for every single space. And if you're in a time crunch, that free delivery, fast delivery, hassle-free delivery certainly goes a long way. Give your home the refresh it needs with WayFair. Head over to wayfair.com right now. That is WayFair.com. WayFair. Every style, every home.
Zach Seyko from Locked On Nittany Lions is back with me here to help us get a better understanding of Notre Dame's next running back coach, Ja'Juan Seider, after he spent the past 7 seasons with Penn State. Zach, I want to get into the how and why this happened because I think it took a lot of people by surprise. But to start, can you just give us some background on Seider's time in State College and what made him such a valuable part of Penn State staff?
Well, Tyler, I'm glad we get to team up again, not under these circumstances, but I guess this is Notre Dame beat Penn State once, and now they beat them again in the offseason here. I mean, this is a massive loss in my mind. Ja'Juan has been with Penn State staff for 7 years, as you've mentioned. He's an elite recruiter. He's nationally recognized as one of the best overall recruiters, regardless of position, regardless of institution, now at Notre Dame. So Notre Dame making a move that is going to at least give them a lot, because he has built up connections in, obviously, Florida, which is where he spent a lot of time of his life. But now being at Penn State and being settled there, Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, Notre Dame and Penn State have certainly gone up for common recruits, Nicholas Singleton being one of them. And Ja'Juan Seider has always been that guy that's been able to continue to not only get the best of the best running backs, but also make inroads for top-end Florida prospects and other prospects that necessarily weren't with his position group. Running back, linebacker, or running back, yes, but linebacker, tight end, offensive line, where he's just able to build that connection. So above all else, you're getting a great recruiter. People that question him about his development of running backs, Nicholas Singleton and Ja'Juan Allen are great. He coached up Miles Sanders for one season. There are some other prospects that people are going to point to that say that they never panned out, and I think it actually has to relate to the player itself more so than the coach. So Notre Dame is getting a really talented running backs coach in his own right. He's just a great person. He's easy to get along with. He's a glue guy. And I think people that overlook this and say, well, it's a lateral move, Penn State will be just fine. That may be true. Penn State will be able to recover from this, but it's not ideal, and especially at this point in the offseason when winter workouts have just picked back up.
Yeah, the timing is certainly a surprise, especially when you consider the fact that Penn State has two of the best running backs in all of college football, Nicholas Singleton and Ja'Juan Allen, coming back next year. And Penn State has a great history of developing running backs. Even before Seider was there, they had a guy that some people might know. His name's Saquon Barkley, and he's doing all right. Guy? Yeah. He actually, not even that good of a game in the Super Bowl, but hey, he's a champion, and he has the single season rushing record now in the NFL. But what changed once Seider got on board? Because they really just took that development to a whole nother level. Like, what has been his impact on Penn State's running back room over the years?
Like, it's the consistency, it's the continuity, it's building relationships, it's dominating the state as Penn State emphasizes, and then being able to branch out, because he has been able to connect in more than just Pennsylvania. Obviously, the state of Florida, state of Virginia too. So it's building those connections, it's building those relationships. The way that he's been able to develop the running back room, people want to point that, oh, Nicholas Singleton and Ja'Juan Allen should be better. Well, I mean, shouldn't any of us? There's always room for improvement everywhere, but Seider did get the most out of players like Journey Brown, who had to medically retire. He had off-season health issues that forced him to retire out of football, and he was a fringe three-star that probably was going to be taken in the second or third round of an NFL draft. So the question marks that are about his coaching and if he can actually develop running backs, from what I've seen, Nicholas Singleton and Ja'Juan Allen have lived up to their expectations. They just haven't been healthy the entire time along the way. But when they are at 100%, they look like their best. So for Seider, he is as good as advertised. And then there's the recruiting element of it. For Penn State, I don't like the idea of Penn State having to face him now, because he was interviewing around for head coaching jobs, particularly one, Florida Atlantic. He was linked to the Florida Atlantic head coaching job, didn't get it this cycle, and this is something that's been an interest of his in past cycles when it was open. But so this lateral move is surprising because he's wanted to see a head coaching opportunity, maybe an offensive coordinator opportunity. He interviewed for Penn State's open OC job before Andy Kotelnicki became the hire. So there's the reason he's leaving Penn State to make this lateral move, to kind of make sense of all of it, is he's been there for 7 years. It's a change of scenery. I know Notre Dame's a private institution, so we'll never truly know his contract details, but I got to imagine they're going to make him one of the highest paid, if not the highest paid position coach in all of college football. That would not surprise me in the slightest. Penn State just did it with Jim Knowles as a defensive coordinator, so I can understand that respect to Seider. But Seider, I think just being around Penn State for a long time, and really he can't move up anymore. Andy Kotelnicki got the offensive coordinator job. You can only give him so many more titles, and Penn State just spent a lot of money for Jim Knowles. So this Notre Dame move, while it doesn't make sense, it really does.
Okay, I have a couple follow-ups there, but you said something that kind of caught me by surprise. So you mentioned that some Penn State fans, or maybe just critics in general, said that Seider isn't as good at developing, which I find really hard to believe because Notre Dame just got to see Nicholas Singleton and Ja'Juan Allen up close. And they look pretty damn developed. So I guess give us more context behind those concerns.
I hope that it's more of a fringe, a smaller group. I've just seen that, they could be better. That this is okay because Ja'Juan Seider didn't get the most out of Nicholas Singleton and Ja'Juan Allen. And I have to disagree because Singleton came in as this elusive running back. He's the home run hitter. But he didn't do it all the time. Do you know how hard it is to break off 70, 80-yard touchdowns? Come on, those expectations are pretty lofty. Both Ja'Juan Allen and Singleton battled injuries this junior season, and they still got a lot out of them. I look at the weaknesses that, for example, Singleton came in with in terms of blocking ability, catching ability, and he added that to his arsenal. Ja'Juan Allen's kind of always been this do everything type of running back where he has the vision, he can hit the lanes, he is able to block, he can catch the ball out of the backfield, but his speed, his athleticism, his agility could be better. And that's why Singleton and Allen complemented each other so well, because it was truly a dynamic of thunder and lightning. And I feel like Seider, under the circumstances, did maximize that. To say that Singleton had this incredible freshman season and fell off is just not true. Mike Yurcich was the offensive coordinator once upon a time. Penn State offensively was not maximizing its overall ability, but I still think Seider deserves a lot of credit. Did they miss on the likes of a Ricky Slade? Yes. Devin Ford, you know Devin Ford very well. Did he materialize at Penn State the way that he should have? Not necessarily, but I think the other Noah Cain dealt with injuries. Journey Brown literally had to medically retire. And Singleton and Allen are well on their way. They should have been top 5 running backs, conservatively top 10 in this year's NFL draft, and Seider deserves credit for that.
Yeah, and I think one intriguing thing about this move is that it's basically going from one of the best running back duos in college football to the other best running back duo in college football at Notre Dame with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, as well as the young guys, Aeneas Williams and Kedron Young. Aeneas Williams came up huge for Notre Dame in that game against Penn State, and he's technically RB3 right now. And granted, he's going to be another year older next year, but Dylan McCullough was willing to rotate all of his running backs frequently and had a role for each one of his guys. It didn't even matter if they were going 4 deep at time. How does Seider go about managing his room and their playing time?
I mean, that's what he's used to. He's always had a dynamic duo outside of Miles Sanders, really, and that was at the first year when he took over post Saquon Barkley. Charles Huff is now the head coach at Southern Miss. He was the running backs coach at Penn State. So before that, so this is all Seider knows, is how to utilize a running back rotation. And yeah, Jeremiah Love and the entire running back depth chart that you named, across the board, it's what Seider's dealt with this entire time. So he knows how to manage running backs. He knows how to play to their strengths. And it is a really good, ideal fit for Notre Dame. I'm just interested in, knowing that he wants to be something more than just a running backs coach, something more than just an elite recruiter. I'm intrigued to see, is he here for 1, 2, more than that, 1 to 2 years? Or is this something that long-term Notre Dame can make work with him?
All right, when we come back, Zach and I will break down how this move will impact recruiting for both schools. Plus, why would Seider make this move now? That's coming right up. To be a great position coach of college football, you've got to be able to develop and recruit, and Seider is regarded as an elite recruiter. What has made him so successful in that regard?
Building relationships, being an honest, transparent coach. Somebody that is not going to sugarcoat anything. I mean, it's kind of all the basic intangibles, Tyler. I mean, it's why coaches are hired at Notre Dame. It's how Marcus Freeman wants to build his staff. It's how James Franklin wants to build his staff as well. So there's a lot of commonalities here. Just Ja'Juan Seider is just very good at being just an honorable person. It's just being a respectable human being. And I think that just goes a long way, especially with transfer portal, NIL, especially this version of college football. It just kind of fits who he is. And it's why these, coaches are able to, either move up or move on and land successfully on their feet, no matter what situation they're in.
What impact do you think this will have on the class of 2026? Because Notre Dame and Penn State are after a lot of the same guys, specifically at running back.
Yeah, so this was the biggest concern of mine. I mean, we didn't even mention the fact yet that Nicholas Singleton was, I think his top two were really Penn State and Notre Dame. And the spring transfer portal window is not too far away. But as you've mentioned, Notre Dame's not looking to add any running backs. Jeremiah Love, as strong as the depth chart is for Notre Dame, Jeremiah Love is still there. And so to bring on Nicholas Singleton or Ja'Juan Allen, they're at Penn State. Yeah. And what's interesting about all of this is because for Seider to leave, I mean, that Seider's one of the reasons they came back. They both could have gone into the NFL draft. There were rumors floating around that teams, mostly in SEC country, trying to use NIL to get one of them, Singleton or Allen, into the transfer portal to get a starting running back, because it's like, oh, your two are co-starters. Why don't you be the star of the team? Be the star over here and not split 50-50 of the workload. And Seider was able to help hold that together. So for him to go to Notre Dame, you're just kind of in a lucky spot if you're Penn State, because what if Notre Dame had a need at running back? What if Jeremiah Love went off to the NFL and you didn't have a clear-cut starter? You didn't know who RB1 was. Sure, you have a trustable RB2, RB3, but if there was a need for it, this could get a whole lot interesting with that second transfer portal window here. But for Penn State, I don't expect Singleton or Allen to go anywhere else, not Notre Dame, not anywhere else. They'll stay at Penn State. What I am intrigued about, okay, Quentin Martin, Corey Smith, guys that are a little lower on the depth chart at Penn State. Jeremiah Love is eventually going to, I don't know the timeline for all three of the running backs at Notre Dame, but Love's going to go into the NFL draft for 2026. So there's going to be an opening. There's going to be a starting job on the line, more snap, a heavier snap count in years' time. If Ja'Juan Seider plans to stay at Notre Dame for 2-3 years, then it might make sense long term for Quentin Martin, a Corey Smith, a Cam Wallace to follow their running backs coach. It will be interesting to see. And Penn State, just like Notre Dame, is very loaded at the running back spot.
What about at the high school level? Because Penn State already has a running back commit in this class. They're looking for more, and so is Notre Dame. And like I said, they are constantly in recruiting battles, but it feels like most specifically at running back.
Yeah, and that's why I don't like the idea of Seider being at a school that directly competes with Penn State for running backs. And now that he's built those connections in Pennsylvania, built those connections in Maryland, DC, Virginia, to an extent, right? Just being around the New York, New Jersey area, okay, this northeast part of the country. Forget Florida for just a moment. Seider has really anchored himself down where Notre Dame is going to continue to recruit. And I know they recruit across the entirety of the United States, but nothing's going to stop Seider. It's like, well, I'm at Penn State, so let me give them my due respect. And they're committed to the class of 2026, 2027 at Penn State. That's not going to stop him from making a phone call. And that would be a disservice to what Marcus Freeman brought him onto. You mean to tell me that Marcus Freeman and Seider are going to look at each other and say that, well, because they're verbally committed to Penn State, we might as well not try to see if there's any interest in joining the Fighting Irish. So Messiah Mickens committed already in the class of 2026. That one gets interesting. I'm not going to judge any posts that a high school athlete makes, but as soon as the Seider news went public, he essentially alluded to the fact like, hey, things are changing. God, can you help me with my decision? And I mean, that's something. It means that Messiah Mickens maybe isn't fully committed to the class of 2026, or now that things change, Penn State's just going to have some heavier lifting to do, and you have to go up against the guy that has built that out for the past 7 years. Keemon Spell's committed to the class of 2027. He's going to be one of the best overall prospects in the country, let alone at running back. And fortunately for Penn State, both of those players are Pennsylvania kids. So Penn State at least has the favorability, if you will, because if they were from Florida or a different part of the country, I'd say, you know what, they might flip and follow Seider to Notre Dame. But I think Penn State at least has, they're still strongly in contention despite only them being verbal commits.
Why do you think he made this move?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it already. The limited upward mobility, Andy Kotelnicki getting the offensive coordinator job, other coaches, particularly Jim Knowles getting that pay bump, And so Seider just didn't have any more upward mobility at Penn State. You could throw whatever specialty, whatever coordinator, or anything that wasn't an actual increase in responsibility. He has been looking at other jobs. And I've asked him before, I've asked him personally, not in this regard, but why are you still at Penn State? Because you have gotten close to, and he's not, well, I'm not going to take a job just to take a job. It has to make sense for me. This one makes sense in the sense that Penn State just couldn't promote him any further. Andy Kotelnicki is the offensive coordinator. There really aren't a lot of other responsibilities to go around. I suppose that Penn State maybe could have gotten into a bidding war to try to give him some more money. But like I said, they just allocated a lot of those resources to hiring Jim Knowles. So what funds did they have left to incentivize Seider to stay? It's Notre Dame, and your listenership, your viewership is going to agree that, I mean, they're a strong brand. And now Seider has that connection, and he sees that, oh, your former running backs coach just went off to the NFL. Maybe he has that in mind now. Maybe head coach or offensive coordinator at the college level is off the table, but I can use Notre Dame to get to the NFL. Penn State assistant coaches haven't been doing that routinely. So to see it at Notre Dame, maybe he views it that way, as that I can use this job as a stepping stone to get further in my career. So pay raise, change of scenery, benefit, just moving up in his career in some regard.
Yeah, I totally get that as a reason to leave Penn State. Like, it does seem like he has reached his ceiling at that university. Now, you can make the case that, well, the team is positioned to make a run this upcoming year. I mean, they just made it to the college football playoff semifinal, but then with all the guys they're bringing back, like, they have a real shot to win a national championship next year. But it's interesting that he would come to Notre Dame, because I also don't think there's a ton of upward mobility for him at Notre Dame. I think that's why Dylan McCullough left for the NFL, because like Seider, McCullough has aspirations to be a head coach. He interviewed for the head coaching job at Ohio. He was a candidate for the head job at Ball State. It didn't work out. Now he's headed to the Raiders to work under Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly. So I don't really think Seider is any closer to becoming a coordinator at a school like Notre Dame, because I think Mike Denbrock is at Notre Dame to stay. He's been with the program. This is his third tour of duty, basically. He coached under Tyrone Willingham and then Brian Kelly, and now he's back with Marcus Freeman, signed a 4-year deal. So I expect him to be around for a while. I think this is probably going to be the last place that he coaches, knock on wood. I probably just jinxed it. He's going to leave tomorrow. But that is what is so interesting to me about his decision to come to Notre Dame, because I think they're two great jobs. I also think the fact that Seider is really close friends with Jared Parker, who is Notre Dame's OC this past year, who worked at Penn State, is very close with Marcus Freeman. I'm sure that Seider went to Parker and asked about working for Freeman. Clearly, Parker and Marcus Freeman still have a great relationship, even though Parker left before the season. So it's a lot of interesting things. I'm very excited to hear what he has to say at his introductory press conference. But this move certainly took me by surprise. From what you've seen, how have Penn State fans and players reacted to his departure?
Interesting, because like I said, I frame it as a big deal. It's a massive loss, whether it's timing, it's continuity. Yes, he's an elite recruiter, and it's not that Penn State can't overcome all of that, but you mentioned it before I did. This is a national championship contending team, both regards. Notre Dame's going to be a national title contender again, and so is Penn State. And I got done explaining how adding Jim Knowles really completes this coaching staff from top to bottom. Yes, James Franklin included as the head coach, but Andy Kotelnicki, Jim Knowles, and then elite position coaches across the board. Anthony Poindexter and Deion Barnes and Terry Smith to go along offensively with Phil Troutman and Ja'Juan Seider. And now Seider leaves that. You mentioned that as a reason to stay, but clearly that wasn't good enough. I mean, sometimes personal reasons just outweigh the professional ones. And you and I agree that Seider taking this move, making this lateral move with really no, way of knowing if he's going to get promoted within Notre Dame. So is this a one and done type of deal, just to get out of Penn State and say, I just need something different for my career? Because like I said, he has interviewed for head coaching jobs in the past. So that allure is there. If he leaves in 1 to 2, I'm not saying that he's going to bolt after one season, but don't be surprised if this is a two max 3-year move for him.
That is definitely my concern. And as exciting as it is to hear how great of a recruiter he is, I'm thinking, like, how long is he going to be around? But then again, Dylan McCullough was around Notre Dame for 3 years and certainly left his mark, recruited and developed Jeremiah Love. So, this is just sort of the cycle. I would prefer it's not one and done, because then you don't really get to build on anything and you're in the same position next year. But you've mentioned that he had been looking at other head coaching jobs, which I get. That's an obvious promotion from being the running backs coach, although he was the associate head coach and the co-offensive coordinator. Was there any inkling, now that you've had time to reflect and say, well, maybe that was a moment that you didn't really think about too much, but now looking back, it might be a little bit more important. Was there any sense you got that things had strained with him and James Franklin or him and Penn State, and that led him to this move? Or was it just a total shock that he would make a lateral move at this point in his career?
I mean, it is a shock in this regard, but it makes sense with, we're never going to get an official report of, okay, what is he making financially? But you have to assume that Notre Dame had to financially make it worth his while. Notre Dame is in a better location than I don't know about all that.
I mean, I don't want to just,
Tyler, have you been to State College?
I have not. I know that it's a pain to get to.
Yes, it is. Yes, it very much is so. And I'm not trying to criticize on what State College is and what its location is, but it can be, it's definitely a preferential area to be in. And to stay there for 7 years when you are born and raised in the state of Florida, I got to imagine that's got to weigh on you at some point. His family's all graduated and out of Penn State. He had a son play for the Nittany Lions, and I thought that's when he was going to leave. When his son when graduated and was no longer enrolled at the school, that this was going to be the time, because he had done his time, 4 or 5 years at that point. But still, James Franklin was able to convince Seider to stay around for 7 years, when really maybe that ultimately wasn't necessarily the best thing for Seider personally. But I think maybe at the end of the day, it was, because he was still recruiting high-level talent. He was making plenty of money. He had as many titles as he could get. But I think at some point in time, again, you just have to be able to advance yourself in your career. And there was no more upward. There was nowhere else for him to go within Penn State.
Zach, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this, man. I know it's not fun to talk about breakups, but you've been a champ, and this has been really insightful, and I appreciate your time. So I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. Appreciate it anytime we get to chat. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. Now, for your second listen and watch, got to check out Locked On Big Ten. Available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Craig Sheeman puts the Big Ten first, talks about all 18 teams in depth. You can't get better Big Ten conference coverage than with Craig, and that's why it's called Locked On Big Ten. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.